Welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a great, distinct pleasure to welcome to the program an old friend of mine, and I would add of the universe in terms of how one sees the development of affairs on this planet or within this universe. That's Tom Kiely. Tom Kiely is a pioneer of early understanding of the importance of multimedia as it became part of the human experience coming out of the print and so forth of the historical pattern. And he and Lenny Charles were involved with the establishment of the INN News Report that was carried, I think, we'll get down to the exact time, for a considerable period of time on Free Speech TV nationally around the country. He was in touch with Brian Dolay and the early pioneers who were taking account of the importance of multimedia. And Tom, it's so good to welcome you to Conversations here to do a follow-up program that we did recently, but it's so good to be in touch with you by Skype.
Thank you very much, Harold, and I'm honored not only to be on your program again, but also to be helping you, start a whole new avenue for you, perhaps, doing interviews via Skype.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that. It's a thing where you can reach out, and I have this long format where I talk at long time, conversations and so forth. But why don't we share? And I'm going to share a little bit out of the normal bailiwick of thinking. But you did send me a bio piece that you had put together yesterday, almost James Joycean stream of consciousness and so forth about your background. It was really interesting, very well written. But why don't you share with us a little bit your background, because you have a personal background that's very interesting and it's informed your work. And then we'll get into serious discussion about multimedia or media communication of interesting and relevant information, both politically and intellectually, as we begin to move ahead. But share your own background a little bit, if you could, please.
Well, thank you very much, Harold. First of all, I should make it clear that you asked for the detailed information, and that's what I wrote for you. Before I speak about my own situation or historical perspective, I think I should add that I think everybody has an interesting background. It's only a matter of your own observation and how interested you are in observation, not only about the world, but about yourself and what's going on around you. And, I'm blessed with the capacity to do that. I'm very interested in almost all things. And fortunately, I've been able to recollect many things, and believe it or not, it provides me and my world and the ongoing situation with a context, because so many things that we're experiencing today, are mere echoes or were built up onto things that from things that started before. For instance, the resurrection of the Cold War, which is going on right now. As you may recall in my bio, I lived in West Berlin, Germany, on the front lines of the Cold War in the height of it. So I was there. I remember what it was like, and we certainly don't need to go back there. But that being said, I'm very fortunate. In a sort of a nutshell, Harold, I think a very interesting way to speak about my background is that I had the great fortune to be in a family that was one of millions of families that were riding the crest of this amazing wave that Franklin Delano Roosevelt created, the American middle class.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And it was the halcyon days of that opportunity. It just seemed like every year that went by, we were making more and more progress as a society. To be clear, it didn't include everyone, but civil rights was gaining as well, and the promise was that perhaps we might have been in the vanguard, but this was what should be expected of everyone. And I mean, they even celebrated these things with teasing us about what a miraculous future we were heading into with the 1964 World's Fair here in New York. And we don't have those things anymore. We are no longer led to believe in a bright future anymore, and I think all that's by design. But
that's a very interesting premise. That's a very interesting premise. You could put it into evolutionary terms. I mean, the period out of the Second World War in the United States of America was halcyon, as you said. That was a 50, 70-year period of incredible growth and growth of the middle class here in the United States of America, which was a very beautiful time in a certain sense for a great numbers of people that hadn't been able to have that out of history, to be able to realize expansive dreams of having a good life and that sort of thing. It was a time of great growth and positive development, don't you think? That
well,
the
you know,
50s,
Harold,
60s,
it wasn't
70s,
only
80s,
it was
90s.
not that only for the fortunate segment of American society that enjoyed it. It was also that for the rest of American society that felt like they were getting in line to participate in that. But I think very, very importantly, Harold, it was a beacon to the entire world.
Yes.
And I think the credibility and the belief in the American dream that spread around the world as a result was absolutely amazing. It accrued to this country in all kinds of abundant ways. And unfortunately, it is now rapidly dissipating.
Well, I'm wondering, that's something we could talk about here. The year, what's the year we're in now? 2014, I guess, is sort of
near
crept
the end
up
of
on
2014,
us quickly, didn't it? You know, but we had that, and we had won the war overwhelmingly, and so that was something. I was from Detroit. That was part of the arsenal of democracy, Willow Run, the whole effort, and everything. And so it was in the United States. We still had a lot of problems. We had inherited a slave system that this country had been developed, had been predicated upon, that had to be addressed. There are a lot of issues of the least advantaged among us that hadn't been adequately accounted for and so forth, and some of those questions. But it was, for a grand swipe of the world, it was an image that could be repaired to and be a model for development of a leadership element in terms of political, economic organization.
You know, Harold, if I may, you started that thought out that you just conveyed to us with the big thought that we had just won the Second World War, we were victorious and so forth. Yeah. You know, there's a lot to think about there that is never discussed or rarely discussed.
Let's discuss
such
it.
as, you know, there's a famous expression, Harold, right? The spoils of war.
Yes.
Okay, and somehow that concept has been sanitized out of the victory of World War II. Yet, it's absolutely there, and we are struggling with that today, okay? The spoils of World War II were what? Control over Germany and Japan. Mm-hmm. You know, Germany is still kind of like an American colony. You know, the political system in Italy and Europe, you know, the meddling that we've done over there, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the UN, for crying out loud. The UN with its Security Council. Who's in the Security Council of the UN? The 5 major victors of World War II.
And
China, Russia, Great Britain, France, and the United States.
Yeah.
Well, those victors have a veto. Any
yes,
one of
do.
them
Yeah,
could veto the entire rest of the planet. If every other country on Earth lined up to vote for something, one of those victors could destroy that vote and shoot it down. If that's not the spoils of war, I don't know what is.
Well, I wonder if we could think about that. Or is it any point in thinking about things in broader sweeps of history and so forth, or maybe even getting out to because I know both of us were influenced by the work of, among others, Buckminster Fuller, who was a great comprehensive thinker. I think you could include a lot of the reading of things of James Joyce. Those thunders were like the electricity and the things that were coming on technologically. But if you take a measure of evolution, we're coming out of an evolutionary process that apparently, I guess we could come agreement. I think it's worthwhile getting it bounding. Let's just get a couple dates. 13.2 billion years ago, this universe was created. Perhaps in parallel universes exist, which tests the second law of thermodynamics in terms of how everything got to be going in universe. And then we got about 3.8 billion years ago before the first constituents of what was to become organic process got started with the constituents of RNA. Then we get to where we have evolution of organic process on this planet. And it goes for many, many years, and there's a evolutionary development of various life forms, one of which was Homo erectus about 200,000 years ago from 2 million years before that. And out of that, there emerged a species called Homo sapien. That's our species. And we've been here then. That makes it about, I think you could figure about 20 years for a generation. That might be 10,000 generations that our species has been here, with a unique capability to extend our consciousness through tools and technology and make the world other than, in a need-like sense, is the way most of the creatures, although the insects have a great role in terms of that, E.O. Wilson and so forth, but that we get to that point, and now we get to a point where we have extended that capability in a unique way. After Neolithic revolution, 10,000 years ago, we got civilization. And ever since we got civilization, we've had a situation where there was some few group who ran everything, whether it was Nebuchadnezzar or the Pharaoh or the Roman emperors or the kings and hereditary families, say, in Europe or elsewhere in the world, where a few people ran everything, and most of the people were wallowing around in the mud of inadequacy in terms of the material situation.
Yes, the great unwashed.
Well, yes. And it's been like that throughout all of human history, by and large. And even our country, which made a break with the hereditary pattern that it held for 1,000 years after Rome in Europe, we made a break with that. But even we were based upon slavery. Chattel slavery. We were built upon a system of slavery, accepting the idea of the differentiation between various groups of people and the public relations and all of that. So that
Harold, I think
that's the historical context out of which we're trying to find something where we wouldn't have a veto power of the powerful, but the power of always ruled, had soldiers to back it up, creation stories and PR to back it up. And that is a system that we're saying we may be coming to the end of a time of the necessity of that kind of a pattern of human organization and everything of that sort of thing, where you wouldn't have to have a veto or the inadequacies.
Listening to what you're saying, the slavery part, which is absolutely true, fundamental. And by the way, just because we don't see the chains anymore doesn't mean that concept is not in force, especially through debt slavery, for instance, where
Thank you.
Free money is then loaned out at interest, which is not created and so forth. But, I simply put, I think it's just called man's inhumanity to man.
Yes.
And I think that's the constant that we have to deal with, and its various ways of manifesting, itself. But the other thing that came to mind when you were just going through that very interesting historical perspective, going all the way back to, the dawn of history, right? One thing that's also constant, in my opinion, is the man's necessity to think he knows what he's talking about, and to think he knows these contexts and so forth, which, frankly, are usually proven wrong every generation or so. And really, what impact does it have on what we're going through today to know whether or not we came out of caves on this date or that date? I have a term for it. I call it the Bedlam principle.
Bedlam, yeah.
Back in Bedlam, it was scientific law that the best way to cure somebody with these spirits in their head was to drill a hole in their head.
Yes, okay? right.
And that was science.
Right.
You could be excoriated. You could be drummed out of the service for going against that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Harold.
Yeah.
How many things that are taken as for granted or common knowledge today will, in 10, 20, 50, 100 years, people turn around and look at us and say, that was Bedlam?
I think that they will look back on this time as that. I do think that, and that we may be at a time of a qualitative transformation in that evolutionary pattern.
Well,
There's never been, we've had spiritual leaders, intellectual leaders, spiritual leaders, Jesus and so on, who said, let's take care of everybody. Let's make sure that we have a real, honest-to-God democracy and so forth. And it's never been. It's never been able to be listened to by the political or the leadership that has always been tempted and seen the world.
They've been able to listen to it. They just don't want anybody else to hear it, and because that would undermine their primacy, which they have all sorts of rationalizations for it, and then believe that it's necessary.
That's true. And then they had all kinds of racial things and all kinds of PR and all kinds of things that they'd do that. They would put into that position of their position, and it was all based on one thing, and that is even at Bretton Woods or Keynes and everything, but it's based on the assumption that you have so many people on this planet, there's so many square miles and there's so many resources.
Stuff. But that Malthusian claptrap.
Right. But the one thing that is...
They've been crying about that for forever. Elites have always been afraid of the surplus. When they need bodies, it's breed, okay? When they need people to tend their fields and to
fight their wars,
man their factories, and most importantly,
fight their wars,
to join their armies.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then motherhood and apple pie, we celebrate it. I think about, who was it, Lenin, that said a bayonet is a tool with a worker at both ends of it, right? Yeah, but at the same time, they have this constant fear of overbreeding. Now they don't need so many people, so now it's full brakes, full reverse rudder. Hey, too many people, calm down. They've been doing this over and over and over again forever. Our hero, our common hero, which I'm proud to say, or one of perhaps several, but one of the most important influences on my young thinking is Buckminster Fuller.
Absolutely, in his class by himself. He's just
absolutely, and he dealt with this.
Yes, he did.
He slapped this Malthusian claptrap down very, very easily. When I was a child, I read one of his books, and he had a statistic in there. Now, it may be slightly different now. I must have read this in the mid-'60s or something. But he said you could take every human being on planet Earth and put them indoors in New York City, and they would have as much elbow room as a person would have at a cocktail party or a nightclub. Okay,
in New
That's
York,
what he said about this Malthusian claptrap all the way back in the 60s. Now, so maybe today it's New York City and L.A. or something like that. Okay, but that leaves an awful lot of cities that would be empty.
There's
a
lot
around
of
the
room
world
out there, yeah. There is
and I did the math myself, and there are people who are fighting this Malthusian eugenicist, frankly, claptrap, and we come to the same conclusion independently. Doing the math, you could take and do the math. You could take the entire population of planet Earth and set it down in a landmass the size of the state of Texas, and they would have the same population density that you and I enjoy here in wonderful Manhattan, New York City. That leaves an awful lot of the rest of the planet Earth bare, denuded of people. All right,
Well,
so this is just nonsense,
You've
and
had
it's
that.
and
You've
it's
had-
evil nonsense.
Yeah,
at that.
in the modern history, you have Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb would carry on that, and there would be people who would be carrying out that. But essentially, the thing that really was informing everything in terms of, and informs our politics, is the assumption. It's one that's called zero-sum thinking, and that is there's not nearly enough. There's not nearly enough. That scarcity, we have a condition of scarcity that for one to win, another has to lose. And that's assumed as anything other than that, and like where you could have where everybody, much less the ecology, could win, is ipso facto absurd. The only way, the idea of there's being scarcity is something that has been assumed as ipso facto truth. That's something you have to live with in terms of practicality. For our tribe to prosper, the other tribe has to be conquered, and that's held. And it still holds.
Let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, it is fundamentally against the dictums of the great Buckminster Fuller. Okay, nonsense. Okay, the universe is extremely abundant. All right, so this stuff about scarcity. And by the way, whether it is scarcity or whether it is overpopulation, this Malthusian stuff, it's all based on fear, okay?
Oh, yeah.
It's trying to put fear into people, into thinking that they should, I don't know, act like lemmings and walk off a cliff. Richard Pryor had a funny expression for it. He said, that the white people were scared of overpopulation, and they were making them, they were breeding less, and he said, all because some rich white guy told them, okay, come on, let's cut the crap. There's too many people on Earth. I got no more room to ride my horsey. Okay. Now that's Richard Pryor. I paraphrase, but the horsey part's correct. But listen, this is who's controlling this discussion about scarcity? The people who have the most. Okay. Now, how can you and I, with a straight face, Harold, entertain a discussion about scarcity when, as we've just seen yet again from Oxfam, okay, the report that says 87 families in the world are in possession of 1/2 of the world's wealth. How can anybody with a straight face have a discussion about scarcity when that abomination is the day? Why are we talking about scarcity? Because we want to maintain that status quo?
Well, there are lots of forces that do want to maintain the status quo de jure ideas that apply to any particular period in history. Is hard to understand, but the Catholic Church only let Galileo off the hook about 12 years ago for saying we were not the center of the universe, because that upset people's sense of identity seriously. And when you come up with an idea that seriously questions the means by which people get a sense of identity, they have a very hard time of accepting it. And it's probably true that we have to somehow deal with inherited institutions within a context that is being qualitatively transformed, and to deal with the future that is a progressive future, particularly if you have a progressive view of things. And Fuller's main thesis out of all that work he did was that we have transcended at the level of capability and design material scarcity on this planet in terms of the human society.
But what happens if that goes into play?
Point, and it's being seen now, it's being seen, but nobody can accept that within the political class, because they're all arguing about we might be able to do that if we do policy A or policy B, but the big guys aren't letting us do it and so forth, the politics of de jure. But the idea itself, we may have transcended material scarcity, is so overwhelmingly significant in terms of subsuming all of our institutional assumptions that have been based on there's not nearly enough. And that's something that never can be mentioned intellectually or anywhere. But it seems to me it's worth bringing up once in a while.
Why can't it be? It's because of the golden rule. Well, he who has the gold makes the rule.
Well, now you're going into a political thing about condemning the people who think that way.
Well, but listen.
It's not them that are, it's us. It's the people to allow that to become the context in which all thinking takes place. Is there's not enough. You got to find the bad guys.
That's true, but, it's very difficult because all of the non-governmental organizations, the actual control of the government itself, there's no question. There's the professors from, one of them's from Princeton, just came out in September. There's no question. The United States is an oligarchy, has probably been for a long time, but it cannot be hidden under the rug anymore. That means power in the hands of a few.
Yes.
And those people are the ones that control all the printing presses, the organizations. They own the media. That's why I got into the alternative media.
That's why we got to get
and their brain trust, people like Ehrlich that you mentioned, who I've had on the show, and it's actually fairly reasonable when I challenged him on that point about how can we discuss scarcity when half of the wealth of the planet is in the hands of a handful. But also this guy, John Holdren.
Yeah,
okay?
I don't know.
Holdren runs is Obama's energy czar. He's
Holder.
Science guy. Yes, John Paul Holdren. He's from back in that era. He was one of these population bomb guys. Okay, these people are so threatened by the genius of Buckminster Fuller that they have to resort to ridicule. Okay, and they call the Fullerians the cornucopians. Okay, that these people, and why are they against them? They're against them because they're paymasters in the in the oligarchy can't conceive of a world where there is not scarcity, which would, by definition, change who they are.
Yeah, but wait a second.
Sure.
If you may, what you're saying is, took all those years for us to get over letting Galileo off the hook for saying it took hundreds of years to be able to swallow the fact that we weren't the center of the universe and begin to see ourselves realistically. Now, if Mr. Fuller, he's one that does it, proposes. What he's proposing is much more significant in terms of the political and sociological and intellectual reality than even what Galileo said, even though that was coming up a line of increased understanding and everything. What he's saying is something that undercuts virtually all of our inherited institutions and our assumptions of politics. Everything is undercut if you say we have transcended material, not just spiritual or intellectual, material scarcity as an ontologic reality. It undercuts virtually every institution thought pattern that we have inherited out of 200,000 years of our existence. It's a big bit to swallow. So forth, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be objecting to that. It still doesn't, it still may be.
I don't object to it, and I think the average Joe doesn't object to it either.
No, but you can understand why people
I don't think it's a lot of people who object to that. It's a handful who control the show.
Oh, if only it were the case, but I don't think it is, because those people are in institutions where they get their identity. They're dependent upon wage slavery and the other kinds of things we've inherited out of history, the institutional structure of everything, things work, and so forth. So
well, they work very poorly.
What I'm
they
saying
do work.
is
They do work, but as compared to what?
As compared to what they could be. That is, we got a future.
They could be much worse, but they could be much, much better as well.
Qualitatively, new potentiality is blowing in the wind now. Bobby Dylan was singing about that. It was something blowing. It wasn't just sex, drugs, and rock and roll in 1970. We were perhaps, that's when Fuller most measured that, we were transcending at and it's not the reality, it's the level of capability. We were transcending a situation where there had always been at level of capability. We couldn't have had that kind of thing in the year 1900 or 1600 or any other time in history until about the time of about around 1970 or so.
Well, look, you bring up Galileo as an example, and that finally the Catholic Church, made it official. But it was official long, long before that happened. The history, science already made the change a long time ago, no matter what the Catholic Church wanted to say finally and pontificate. All right? I think so, too, with this truth, okay, that I don't need to wait for elites to figure they just can't keep it under the rug anymore, so they might as well sanctify it, okay? It's absolutely true. Nanotechnology and so forth.
Right.
Material scarcity is something that, can absolutely be overcome, but it would change the political order. It would change the power structure, and that's where the real
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And everybody have their identity wrapped up in all those institutions, or what they do. Or now what you're getting is nanotechnology, like you say, and it's coming, and you're also getting, information technology moving exponentially. It's not just hyperbolic or something. It's exponential, and it's going over into robotics. And the robots are becoming able to produce the goods and services, and algorithms can do all the checking of little boxes that all kinds of people had to do in order to have a job, in order to get income. And the same thing, they only think they can distribute income to the masses of the people is through them having a job on the estate, where the assets that are producing the wealth are all held by a tiny plutocratic class.
Well, hold it right there.
The intellectuals are at fault, as well as the people who are being sid by the left, let's say, as being greedy and so forth. It's their fault, but it's also our fault for not making a case for that there has been a major qualitative transformation that ought to be brought up once in a while within the consciousness of the Homo sapiens species. It's never brought up that we have transcended material scarcity seriously with modeling. It's never brought up. It's ipso facto absurd. Everyone can see there's not enough.
Ipso facto absurd, just like the world was not the center of the universe for a long time. But look,
right.
you raise a great point, along the lines of what Fuller talked about, and he discussed these things. All right, so you've got all this technology, robots can do all the drudgery. That's a fork in the road. Where do we go with that? Okay, people like Fuller said, well, people can have more leisure time to be creative, to have recreation, to explore, to think, and go out there and interact with nature and so forth.
Yeah.
But you have to like people to hold that position. Okay. On the other hand, it is the Malthusians are like, okay, we don't need so many people anymore. Shut it down. Let's drive everybody into the big cities and put them under lock and key so that we can go and rewild the countryside, and we can go ride our horses and everything like that. Okay, which way is this going to go? You have to like people. You have to have a love for humanity. You have to be a humanitarian. Okay,
Yeah.
to say, wow, this could really benefit people, and people could now experience a new level of existence where it's not just hand to mouth. It's also creative. It's intellectual. It's spiritual. It's development. It's cultural, and so forth. But that's not the way the people who really run the show want to see it. Number one. Number two, you mentioned all these institutions. Well, they've created those institutions, and those institutions do their bidding. Okay, I think it's tremendously corruptive, not just on the political level, on the educational level, certainly in the media.
Yeah.
Okay, which is why you and I do what we do, because we try to provide people with that alternative. If I may speak for you, Harold, I think we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, it won't be heard. My show is all about taking these thinkers who remind us of the truths of people like Buckminster Fuller, and taking these people who have examined the political situation and say, no, this is an oligarchy. Don't believe it, all right, that you still have any say in the matter. To give those people voice, because they don't have a voice in the corporate media. They don't have a voice in academia for a large part. Why? Because projects need to be funded.
That's right.
And it comes from the foundation funding, and all those foundations are named after the great oligarchs. And if you think that those oligarchical foundations are going to fund programs that detract from their wealth and power, I got a bridge that I'd love to sell you right down the street here. It takes me about 10 minutes to walk there.
Brooklyn Bridge. It could
there
be
you
sold.
go, sir.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that, but that's the situation that we're in, and that's something we could talk about the media then, because the media is coming, and you've been involved. You and Lenny, and you were involved with Free Speech TV, and you were involved with multimedia. Why don't we talk some about that? Because multimedia is part of a thing. Remember, I can remember when there was no such thing as television, hard as it is to imagine, much less multimedia, much less an internet, any of that. It's all come within our lifetime, more or less, and it's having incredible consequences in terms of the way people communicate and are educated and develop their conscious idea of reality and so forth. It's having a great effect. And you were interested in understanding some of that, the implications of multimedia, and you have been involved for a long period of time in trying to have some alternative ideas put out through the use of multimedia, particularly television and/or the things that are coming up now on the internet. And you have an interest in that goes back some decades, right?
Well, Harold, there's three major points there. I would say. Okay, number one, you've got the technology itself, and you talk frequently about multimedia, television, all these things. These things are merely conduits. That's all they are. Okay, they're dumb conduits.
Well,
okay, it's not the conduit. Okay, it is the content that flows through it. Okay,
with
number two.
Respect,
and number three, the other thing that's so important to consider is that the cost of the conduits are going down, down, down every day with technology. So therefore, it begins to put the creation of those pipes into the hands of people like you and I and my good friend Lenny Charles and all the other great people out there who are working in the alternative media. So those are the three things. The fact that there's all these great new conduits, that's not very impressive. In fact, it could be even worse, okay? It gives Big Brother more power to hypnotize and disinfoize everyone, okay? And to with a phantasmagoria of, you know, special effects and phony baloney news reports where you've got news readers masquerading as journalists who are reading a script that they were just handed from the State Department or from the Pentagon, you know, all this ISIS stuff. They don't know the first thing about ISIS. They're getting handed a sheet of paper from the State Department that tells them what to say about ISIS.
Well,
you know, remember Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And bin Laden and the Taliban and all that. We created those monsters, okay? And we're doing it again, okay? But why would we know about that? Because our news readers are just handed a piece of paper, and you know, and it's quite obvious. You're old enough to remember that wonderful comedy team of Tom and Dick Smothers, right? They had a television program in the 60s.
Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. I mean, it goes back longer before that. Yeah.
Well, but this is very important and specific. Okay, the Tom and Dick Smothers were very wholesome, young, white comedians. They had an act with music. They came up through the ranks, and they did hootenanny and the folk music scene, and they did folk music in combination with very, very funny comedy. And then they were on the Hollywood Palace, the early TV variety shows. They went to Ed Sullivan and so forth, and they rose up through the ranks. They got to the point where in the 1960s, the early 1960s, they were being considered for their own television program. And at that time, the television show Bonanza, which, you know, portrayed this mythical American Manifest Destiny family out in the frontier there, you know, that was the big lock on Sunday nights. Nobody could touch the ratings of that show. Yeah. And finally, the Smothers brothers, I think it was actually Tommy Smothers, he was the sort of dumb guy in the act, but he was really the businessman in reality. He went to the network and said, look, give us a shot up against Bonanza. Okay, everybody else has failed. Let us try. And what happened? He said, you'll be a genius either way. If it works, you'll be the genius who slayed Bonanza. If it doesn't, you have nothing to lose because nobody can beat Bonanza. And that's what they did. And guess what? Their show beat Bonanza. It became very, very popular on Sunday nights. I watched it as a child. I was influenced by it as a child. I saw Pete Seeger sing knee-deep in the Big Muddy, a stick in the eye to Lyndon Baines Johnson about the quagmire of Vietnam on that show. They took it seriously, and they got political, and they got satirical against the powers that be, and they were censored right off the air. Okay?
Well, but I would take some exception to that. Marshall McLuhan wrote a book, The Medium is the Message. The medium is by which you communicate is more important than the message. You're concentrating on the political message and the political reality and so forth, but the existence of the media is creating a different kind of sensory balance within the people who are involved in and so forth. There's a lot more to the existence of the media. But
who needs the media if you don't have a healthy message?
Well,
I would say...
Well,
good thing we don't have the media if we have a poisonous message.
Well, the point being is that the medium is that the back to Mr. Fuller, if you could. I think that's not so widely done. I mean, you can read all the systems thinkers, Isaac Asimov, and you know some of these other people besides Fuller. But this idea that you can make a distinction between reality, inherited reality, with all of the institutions in place. We have highways, we have railroads, we have buildings, we have institutions, we have agricultural patterns, we have factories, we have all kinds of institutions that were built within a context, and it was built right, and some of them still go back to slavery, actual chattel slavery, and then wage slavery, and injustice, and so forth. You have all of these kind of things, and then this idea of Fuller's was never that. He never said, let's look at the political, don't do things political. Don't look at the good guy, bad guy. Or that there's some guys are good guys and some guys are bad guys and the Republicans or Democrats or anything. He said, make technological artifacts that can make the good come out rather than trying to make people good in a sense
but you know
where
what?
they haven't been.
First, two things about that.
So,
First of all,
and the major premise of his
the problem
work.
with that, Harold, is that it's Pollyannic in the sense that it assumes that, oh, hey, if you come up with some life-saving benefit for humanity, why, it's a no-brainer. It'll fly. No, that's not true. It doesn't. Okay,
well,
and look what happened to Tesla. Okay, with all of his great inventions that are still being pondered today. Free energy.
Right.
You know, the transmission of electricity through the air without copper was killed by his money guy, J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
Okay, this is simply not true. There are great benefits to humanity that have been discovered ages ago, but you can't make a buck on it. You know, when I was a young man in the service, and we had the first Arab oil embargo while I was in West Berlin. We saw it in the papers. We saw it on the news, and we could only imagine our families back in the States with long lines for gasoline. And it was at the end of the Vietnam War. We looked at each other. We said two things. We said, first we said, well, I guess the next war is going to be over oil. And then the other thing we said was, there was all of this great talk about a new Manhattan project. Oh, okay, we're going to lick this energy thing. Oh, it's time. Okay. And we all laughed at each other and said, yeah, right. And they were talking about solar energy. And we said, you're never going to have solar energy because you can't put a meter on the sun. All right. And that's basically, where's all the advances, Harold, since 1973 or 74, whenever that first oil shock was? What happened to that Manhattan Project? What happened to the 100-mile-per-gallon automobile and so forth? Who killed the electric car? On and on and on.
Well, all of that is seeing things in a political context. And if you want to see it that way, you can, really. But the point we're trying to make, perhaps, I don't know, they're getting feedback here, but the point you're trying to make is that the major premise that Mr. Fuller put forth is one, again, that's not ever, we don't have an operating manual for spaceship Earth that is comprehensively understanding the reality at the level of capability. Make a distinction between you just ticked off a lot of things. Ray Kurzweil is very good at reporting incredible developments that are developing now in terms of all the capability of information technology. DeMonte's, the book, Abundance, is now a big bestseller, and it's got a lot of following. You've got a lot of people who are being able to realize that this gestation thing is coming. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the premise of it all, in terms of understanding things comprehensively, not politically, but comprehensively, is that the premise is there is enough for all and the ecology which there has never been. So we have to be, that principle is never brought up in an abstract or intellectual sense. Intellectuals can't get their mind around it. They get
I would say slightly more accurately.
Who else besides Fuller is making that major premise, and where do you ever hear that that is in a certain sense part of it? It's not the reality with all the institutions and the drag of history by reifying and relating to the institutions we've inherited out of one condition. We got a lot of those that came out of slavery we had to incorporate and incorporate. We got a lot of outdated institutions and thought that is relating to a situation that has been at the level of capability. It's out there. It exists. The basic premise is there is enough. There never has been enough.
I would modify that slightly.
Okay.
I don't think there's more material. It's the access to it that is here now, okay? It's always been around us, but never before have we had the technological and enlightened access to it, okay? So I'd be very careful about that.
No, we didn't. We couldn't have flown to Hong Kong in 3 hours in the year 1000. We couldn't have done anything.
No, but all
building up.
of the aluminum for the airplane was already there. Okay,
Well, all of the resources,
all the silicon in the chips was already
true.
there.
You're
We just didn't know how
right.
to access it and put it together the right way.
We emerged. Can we agree? We emerged as a species. We believe in evolution. We evolved, and so we understand we're all African, right? We all came out of Homo erectus. We understand that clearly now, and that we had 10,000 generations, and all the resources were here when we came out of the cave. All the oil, everything was here. All the steel, all the iron ore, everything was here. Coal. We had a liaison with retaking what was here and building a world that had social implications in terms of our species. We've now come to where, and all of those were done in the assumption that there's not nearly enough. Scarcity.
Well,
Scarcity was the reality that had to be adopted to, and that is held right up until just yesterday in terms of the total capability that's existing to us. And we have to come up. We have to come up with an
scarcity. The material, as you pointed out, and I pointed out, the oil's already there. The aluminum for the planes is already there. It's a matter of access. Scarcity is, clinging to very inefficient ways of accessing all of this stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and there's people's identities are wrapped up in those roles.
And people's profits and people's institutions and people's businesses and so forth are wrapped up in it.
If you do, you're going to need something other than either Mr. Keynes or Mr. Marx or Mr. Schumpeter or Mr. Hayek or any of the political things that are informing the political process. In economic theory, you're going to have a new economic theory that makes sense in terms of unleashing this capability that is now here. And we have to have a way of doing that, and our intellectual class is falling down on the job.
Harold, I don't know if you ever saw this. There's an excellent documentary that addresses this issue that you raised very, very well. Okay, what people don't understand are the forces arrayed against them. Okay, there's a film called The Light Bulb Conspiracy. Okay, there is a light bulb that has been burning constantly in California for over 100 years now.
Really?
A light
I didn't
bulb
know
in a
that.
firehouse in California that has been burning uninterrupted for over 100 years now. You say, how could that be?
Yeah,
that has to be a light bulb that's at least 100 years old to burn for 100 years. Well, guess what?
What is that?
The technology to make light bulbs burn for 100 years was there from day one. Okay? And what happened was man's inhumanity to man in the form of the people who had the money to mass produce light bulbs formed a cabal, okay? A conspiracy, a self-regulating conspiracy where they put down strict regulations that no one was to make a light bulb that could burn for more than 2,000 hours. They couldn't advertise them. They had to build in obsolescence.
Yeah, built-in obsolescence is part of the marketing.
This is with light bulbs. Now, let me ask you, Harold, if every light bulb that was made 100 years ago was made the same way, okay, and you and I grew up in a home with the same light bulb burning, how many light bulbs would that have saved? How many toxic waste dumps would that have saved?
Yeah.
How much glass and metal that got used and thrown out and could have been put to other use? How much cash that came out of the pockets of working people to buy all those light bulbs that could have been supplanted by one single light bulb in the course of 100 years and counting? Okay, this is absolutely real.
Why did those kind of things happen in terms of the economic theorizing? Lord Keynes saw it coming. Like, for instance, we're being confronted now with in the year 2014, Piketty. Everybody is reading Thomas Piketty's book.
Right.
Everybody in the leadership class, not the comment, is not to be read because it's so dense and everything. But Mr. Obama and the president of China and the World Bank and all of the all of the major institutions that make up the world establishment are reading that book with chagrin, because its premise is that we have a capability of providing incredible amounts of living for the population, but we do not have a way of being able to distribute effective buying power to a world where we assume the only way that a person can get income to buy something that can be done, either a good or a service, is by having a job, a labor relationship to a productive process that is becoming overly technological and capital intensive in its means of production, and they don't have a way of distributing.
So let's go to a 4-day work week.
No,
let's go to a 3-day work week.
Okay, now you're talking, but that's not able to be realized within the political order. And James Joyce had, I mean, not the theorizing has not been able to. So what it is we're coming to a time where we need something new in terms of the overall. We need an operating manual that gives this kind of information you're doing as part of it and so forth, but not political.
Well, I
we
think
have
the
to have
resistance.
Something that can subsume both right wing, left wing, private sector, public sector. All of these things, these argumentations that have held throughout that history are going to have to be incorporated with an overarching understanding of a larger reality against which all these things, these formula for forming capital. How are we going to form capital? How are we going to form
Look, at one
demand?
point people work 7 days a week or 6 days a week, So what? Okay, so if why don't we go to a 4-day work week? Oh my gosh, we can't do that. Why can't we do that? Because the great unwashed would have too much time on their hands, and then they might notice other things and come after us with the pitchfork.
Now you're going into a political screen. You're going into a thing where you're going to condemn the political thing. What it has to do is something that's a problem. How are we going to distribute demand? One thing you could do is form capital in a way where some ownership gets into the hands of the people so that they have income coming to them by something other than labor. By a job.
Don't throw labor out yet.
No, you don't want to throw it out, but you don't want
Harold,
to
please,
be hung
don't
up
throw labor out yet.
with
You
it.
and I touched on this subject, and I think it really bears returning to on our last interview. Okay, we talked about the Great Depression. The country was flat on its back.
Yeah.
Okay, there was no money, there was no investment, there was no hope, there was no capital, there was no vision, there was no nothing, and then all of a sudden. Don't forget that concept again, the spoils of war, okay?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, our oligarchy was threatened by another oligarchy.
Yeah.
And saw the opportunity, okay, you guys over there threw the first punch, but you know what? We come back and knock you off and we take all your toys, okay?
Yeah,
so what happened? Overnight, the Depression disappeared, and somehow all the money came floating down from heaven to buy and to build in your Ford factories out there, all those B-24 Liberator bombers, all those P-51D Mustangs, all those TBF Avenger torpedo planes, all those battleships, all those aircraft carriers, all of those K-rations, all those bullets, all them M1 Garand rifles, all those steel pot helmets, all those bandages. Suddenly, the spigots opened, the money was there all along, but the oligarchy decided, this is worth spending it on. And now don't tell me, do not please tell me that, no, we just can't spend willy-nilly on stuff that doesn't matter and freebie stuff. All of that war material is freebie stuff, okay? It blows things up, and then it gets blown up, and then it gets mothballed, okay? There's no benefit to it after a couple of years of service. On the other hand, why couldn't we do the same thing right now and take the same initiative and open the spigots up and fix the roads, build the new bridges, do the maglev trains, okay, like they have in China and Japan.
They did that in China.
They have maglev trains in China and Japan. You know how many jobs that is? Don't tell me, we can't put too much money. This is putting money into the economy from the bottom up in the hands of workers, and it's not like a P-51D Mustang or a four-engine Liberator bomber built by Ford. It's not like that, because that stuff is used and shot down and destroyed or mothballed.
Yeah,
okay?
right.
This is a bridge that will be used for decades and decades and
Well,
enjoyed by people, and
yeah.
lives will be made better. This is parks. This is hospitals. This is institutions for higher learning. This is jobs. This is all kinds of stuff. It is there right now.
Okay.
And the real problem is not the ability to do it. The real problem is the Wizard of Ozadry, okay? This claptrap. You mentioned Von Hayek and the Austrian school and all these idiots, okay?
Well,
that tell, oh, you can't make too much money. No, it depends on what you're making it for. They made a mountain of money for World War II, and it was all into producing things that were of absolutely no value the second the war was over. Okay, these are things that will have value for decades and decades to come. So you can't tell me that you can't make the money like they did in World War II today, right now, but to make things that are of use to humanity.
Well,
okay?
that's a very good stance to take, and something that would be encouraged by a lot of people in order for that to be done.
It could be done tomorrow. It could be done overnight.
It seems to be that there's some difficulty within our political system of being able to realize this thing that you're saying. And the theme of Mr. Peckety is that we're not going to be able to have all those things and distribute that buying power in the people by having them have a job. There's going to have to be a new way of forming capital. That would be referring to the right wing, the private sector. We're not going to do away with it. We're not going to just have a socialist system.
No, it's going to be the private sector that's going to build all these bridges, okay?
Well,
it's going to be the private sector that's going to mine all of that ore. It's going to be the private sector that's going to make all that steel that goes into them.
Those things are going to be realized without human activity doing it. They don't need the human beings to produce the stuff and the benefits you're talking about, and that's the problem.
So what happens?
The only way they have to distribute income, they're going to let all the income capital assets producing the stuff be in the hands of a few people. We're letting that go. The left is letting that go, and they're just talking about we got to create jobs for people when the trend of the technology is to do away with the job, the productive process of labor into production. That's the major problem.
Well, you
One of the problems we have, my brother, in terms of this, we got to do some more. And in cable television, we didn't get around to talking about all the good work you and Lenny and all these people did in terms of alternate systems of distributing intellectually relevant understanding of what's going on. But one of the problems in television is you have a limited time. We've run out of time. We have no more time. What are we going to do?
I'll finish with this
thought.
What
are we going to do? You presented something that makes an awful lot of sense to a lot of people, and that'll be something that's going to be discussed. But I think it has to be able to take into account the formation of capital, maybe ownership, rather than something that is just a few people. It's got to be distributed widely as a way of distributing buying power to the people. I think that's something that has to be entered into the economic equation.
They did it during World War II. They can do it tomorrow.
You got to have something that can include the left and the right, both, in an overarching system. That we don't have. The intellectuals have to come up with that.
We call it, on INN, we call it transpartisanism.
Okay, very good. INN, very good. Your pleasure. Sorry we've run out of time. Give my love to Lenny Charles, great guy, and also Brian Drolet by extension and everything. The early pioneers of doing good multimedia television distribution. Thanks a lot. It's really good to talk to you, Tom.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be your first Skype interview.
Yeah, well, this is not the first.
Tip of the hat.
I'm going to try and do more of this, you know.
I think you should.
I think the intellectuals have to really get something new other than the old way of just seeing enemies and stuff. I think there's
Amen, brother.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks for viewing.
Harold.
We'll be coming back again tomorrow. That's it. Guest Tom Kiely. Thanks a lot for that, Tom. Great to be in touch. Okay.
Thank you, Harold.
Okay. So long for now. Thank you. Okay.
How was that?
Well, I think we finished. I think we've done 58 minutes. And
Okay.
I like your idea of let's do a lot of infrastructure and build those light bulbs and all. Absolutely, I can see it.
Do you see it? Do you understand the argument against it? Oh, we can't make all that money. It'll be make work, and it'll be toys. No. We did it during World War II. All of that